And that began the process of really coming into, oh, I'm actually in my, like, God didn't make a mistake in making me a woman. And so I'm actually a gift, and actually men are a gift. I'm like, wow. I mean, that completely blew my mind. So God was working on that when I met Garry.
Everything just came alive. God renewed my heart. I felt like he was softening my heart. My heart had been hardened for so many years. And so I ended up meeting Jason there, and I remember getting really frustrated and being like, God, I told you I don't want a relationship with a guy. Why do I have these attractions towards a man? And I don't know. And then I guess the rest is history.
Who I idolized was myself. My sense that I had to control everything in my life to make it go smoothly, and I really didn't believe that God was greater than my experiences, my challenges.
I'm often asked, and probably you guys are too at different times, when did you know that you were ready for a marriage? Or even when did you know you were ready to begin dating? I'm not a big fan of the whole like dating scene kind of thing, but just to even begin kind of exploring the possibility that maybe God is opening a door for me to date or and to spend time with and to move beyond friendship.
And just choosing to go through that process and do the hard things really showed me that I'm stronger than I thought I was. And learning that God was a good God who loves and cares and is strong and capable, I was able to borrow that strength and own that myself, to where I felt like there could be something more for me. This thing that seemed so big, these attractions, this future that I didn't know what it was going to look like.
This overflow, and this love that I felt, but I was also able to receive and give. And so I think it was around that time, honestly, where I noticed Jason, and I started feeling like maybe I did want to start dating or get married, and it scared me. And I remember wrestling with God over it, like, is this really something you have for me, or that I could actually do?
I distinctly heard the Lord say, you put the work in so that you can be healthy in a relationship. And what that means is you have to kind of put yourself out there. Like, I'm not going to drop a guy on your windowsill, because I was in a basement apartment.
Hey friends, thanks so much for joining us for the Love and Truth Network podcast. Whether you're coming to us through a connection with Love and Truth Network or through a connection with Transforming Congregations, we're glad that you're here and joining us. And we're going to have a little bit of a different time today, actually. Usually I just have either a monologue that I'm sharing with you, but more often than not, I'm doing an interview with one other person. Today we have myself, my wife Melissa, and then Jason and Teresa as well, as another married couple. And Jason, of course, shared with us last week for our podcast, and we thought it'd be a really helpful thing and hopefully kind of a fun thing for us to come together as couples and talk about our own histories a little bit. Teresa is especially going to share a little bit more of her story. Jason shared last week. Melissa's testimony in long form is out on our website, and you've heard from her already as well if you've been following our podcast. So we're just going to have an open dialogue of discussion around some topics that hopefully will be of real interest to you and ultimately be helpful in the end as well. So I just want to invite you also to share, to like, to subscribe to this podcast and get the word out there for people to know that this is available to them. So, hey, everybody, thank you so much for being here. Jason, Teresa, especially, and Melissa.
We're glad to be here. Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes,
well,
thank
hey,
you.
why don't we make Melissa go first? And she's kind of an old pro at this, and then we'll hear from Teresa. But
guess.
Melissa, if you'd share a little bit of your story, and especially as it connects with our marriage, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's awesome to be here today, and especially to meet new friends and encourage those that are listening. I think when I think about what does it take to come into marriage in as healthy of a place as possible, I think back to really looking for love in all the wrong places. I think many people can identify with that. And for me, I was involved in high school in 3 long-term sexual relationships with men. I mean, they were my age, but really looking to them to provide a sense of worth and identity, value. I was really looking to someone else to give me a sense of security. And of course, no other created being can actually do that. And so when I went away to college, I met a guy and we were dating. We became sexually involved pretty quickly. Going into my sophomore year, we were engaged, and I had everything going for me. But I really began to struggle with depression. I had this empty feeling. I missed him terribly. And I just wasn't finding any kind of satisfaction really in anything. And through a variety of circumstances, I began to question my sexuality. And so I broke off my engagement, and probably about maybe a year later or 6 months later, I met a woman at a lesbian bar, and we began dating. And when I got involved with her, that kind of changed everything in terms of really feeling like this is what I've been looking for my whole life. And so that relationship quickly ended, but and I was devastated. And I think it was not about really her, but it was about kind of the weight of all of my broken relationships. I'd kind of moved from one serious relationship to another because I couldn't really bear to be alone. And so there was no grieving, there was no processing anything. And so when this relationship with this woman ended, that was kind of my breaking point, and really I came to faith as a result of that. And that would be great. That was great, except, and I talk about this all the time, so my eternal destiny was secure, and I was genuine in wanting to follow Jesus, but my thinking was completely distorted about how to relate to other people in healthy ways. And so that's what I really needed help with. And it wasn't until I got involved in a long program called Living Waters where I began to really understand why I related to people in such broken ways, including my emotional dependency and relational idolatry is what it really is on men and women, actually. And so I began to understand that I had a deep need for my father's love that I didn't get. But also I had detached probably around the age of 12 from my mom because I saw her as trapped in a bad marriage. And so I defensively detached from her. I didn't get love from my dad. And in addition, I was exposed to pornography and some other inappropriate, abusive sexual things. And so I internalized a view of men that was very negative. And we can talk more about that. But basically just things like all men want is sex, men are passive, men are stupid. I mean, this was all things I really believed about my father, but I had kind of generalized onto men. And so praise God that Living Waters was in that small group, and in the teaching and in the worship, God really began to convict me and show me where I needed to lay down my judgments about myself and about men, about other women, and really choose to trust Him. And that began the process of really coming into, I'm actually in God didn't make a mistake in making me a woman. And so I'm actually a gift, and actually men are a gift. I'm like, wow. I mean, that completely blew my mind. So God was working on that when I met Garry. And so maybe we'll talk a little bit about how the dating and and engagement went later. But basically, yeah. So I feel like Garry and I had done a lot of work before we met, and which was great. And that it was still a bit of a rough road. So, but we've been married. How long have we been married, hon? 17 years?
Almost 17 years in September.
Right.
Yeah. And actually, thanks, hon, for sharing that. And Jason, I think that a couple of weeks ago when we did our first podcast together, I think you referenced Living Waters as well, right?
Yes. I did learn from, all I've done with Living Waters is read Andrew Comiskey's book. It was Living Hope that Teresa and I actually were involved in here in Arlington, Texas, with Ricky Chalette. That's where we met, and he performed our wedding ceremony.
Great. Okay, yeah, that's awesome. So, Teresa, do you have any familiarity with Living Waters Desert Stream Ministries?
Yes, I went through Living Waters as well with the women's director at Living Hope. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. That's great. Yeah, we're big fans. We've been regional coordinators with them for, this year is actually going to be 20 years. The very first time I went to my first training while I was on pastoral staff. So God has used Andy and that ministry in profound ways in all of our lives. But yeah, so Teresa, if you'd share a little bit of your story, we'd love to hear that.
Yes, thank you so much. So I did not grow up in a Christian home. My mom and my dad got married right out of high school, and my dad, right after I was born, it was a little too much for him. He wasn't ready for the responsibility, so he left my mom. So my mom went into the military. I ended up staying with my grandmother for a couple of years. She was older, and it was just a lot on her. She was verbally abusive. My mom ended up maybe physically abusive. My mom, and I had some sexual abuse as well while I was staying with my grandmother. So everything going on, my mom got out of the military to come back and get me. She had gotten married while she was in the military. My stepfather had been through a lot and had a difficult life. And in turn, he was also a very abusive man. So I just grew up in this really hostile environment where my stepfather really didn't want to take on a kid that wasn't his. Him and my mom had a daughter, so I had a stepsister. So I'm growing up with an abusive dad who doesn't really want to have anything to do with me. I see a lot of arguing between him and my mother that always seemed to be about me. So I internalized a lot of that. Didn't feel loved. He got really upset when my mom and I would even spend time together. So I just internalized all this, felt like I couldn't connect with my mother. I didn't have a father who really was loving towards me. So I just kind of found a lot of my identity at school through athletics, through academics. I just really put my whole life into trying to be successful there. I saw a lot of success in volleyball and soccer and softball. I was always kind of a tomboy and got made fun of a lot about that. I remember people asking if I was a lesbian from pretty early on. And I do remember being attracted to girls when I was younger. I especially have a lot of memories being in the locker room with my friends and being kind of embarrassed and ashamed about the feelings that I had. So I would always dress looking down because I didn't want to look at my friends. So I have a lot of those memories early on. But my home life was just really, really hard. And like I said, my parents weren't believers. Parents were alcoholics. Sometime around middle school, my stepdad's ex-wife had died. So his two kids came and lived with us as well. And he just made it very well known that I would never be good enough to be one of his children. Just a lot of different things that happened with that. So I just always felt other than. I just didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't feel like I was wanted or loved. And so this went on throughout, basically until I graduated high school. But when I was 15, I remember my mom was the director of a preschool, and she worked with a woman, and she would come home talking about this lady all the time, like how different she was, just how amazing she was. And I remember like really having just some jealousy. I really didn't like this woman my mom was always talking about because she had the attention of my mom that I wanted, but one day I went to my mom's job and I met her and we ended up becoming best friends. She shared the Lord with me. I became a believer. And I just feel like life kind of transformed. God just did a work in my heart, but I had all this brokenness and this hurt and these attractions that I really didn't know what to do with. I just didn't know. My goal was to get away to college, get away from my home life, and just kind of move on. And so I was able to do that. I got a volleyball scholarship. I moved from Florida to Tennessee to go to college. And it was great. My freshman year was amazing. But this girl on the volleyball team came up to me one day and told me that she knew that I was a lesbian and she continued to pursue me. And after a year of pursuit, I just kind of gave in. And that's when I got into my first relationship with a woman, and things kind of just spiraled out of control. I felt a lot of shame because I didn't feel like I was doing what God would have wanted me to do, but I also really felt attracted to this woman and wanted to be true to my feelings. And so just a lot of torment inside, but this went on for years where I was in a relationship with different women and drinking alcohol to kind of deal with the shame, kind of fell away from the church. I didn't want to be involved in any of that as I was kind of living this lifestyle, pulled away from a lot of my good friends back home. And that lasted for a couple of years until I ended up getting suspended from my college. It was a Christian college. I ended up getting suspended, and I just kind of felt like I hit rock bottom and God was kind of trying to get my attention. And so at that point, I kind of stopped drinking alcohol and started trying to go back to church and connecting with some old friends. And everything started going well for me again. I just decided I wasn't going to handle attractions. I wasn't attracted to guys at all. I didn't want to be in relationships with women. So I just kind of started, studying, working on volleyball, working on my school, pursuing Jesus again. And everything went well for years, honestly, until I graduated school. I left, moved to Texas, got a job, was working with teenagers. Everything was great. And then I ended up meeting a woman that I was attracted to. I pursued her for a while, and we ended up getting into a relationship and living together. And I thought I had everything that I wanted. I was extremely happy, but the Holy Spirit would not leave me alone. I just felt like God kept pursuing me, kept telling me He had more for me. And I remember I was at church one Sunday, and the pastor was doing a series on idols, and I just felt like I had created this idol of women and of this one in particular. And I just felt very convicted. And like I said, the Holy Spirit the whole time had always, I just felt that I had this nudge in my heart where God was like, I love you. I have more for you. And so we ended up breaking up, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I ended up going to Living Hope. I remember being so broken and not wanting to have anything to do with anyone. I would just sit in the back of the room. Didn't want anybody to notice me. And I don't know. I just feel like through the preaching that Ricky did, he was just so consistently pointing us towards Jesus and how, same-sex attraction wasn't this huge, big problem, but we just needed to put our attention on Jesus and just surrender everything to Him. And I just started going through Living Waters and doing the hard work of dealing with the abuse I had been through, the hurt that I had, and recognizing all this stuff coming up in my life. And I just feel like God transformed my heart. And I remember just describing it to people as the world just looked like a pop-up book. I mean, everything just came alive. God renewed my heart. I felt like He was softening my heart. My heart had been hardened for so many years. yeah. And so I ended up meeting Jason there, and I remember getting really frustrated and being like, God, I told you I don't want a relationship with a guy. Why do I have these attractions towards a man? And I don't know. And then I guess the rest is history.
That's awesome. That's so great. And you said Ricky did the wedding too, right?
He did, yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how long did you, Teresa, work with Ricky at Living Hope?
Yeah, I guess, 2007, is that when I started there? Okay. I think so. And then we probably stayed through 2015.
Okay, so a good long while.
Yeah.
Yep, that's great. Awesome. Well, there's something that that you shared, Teresa. I just wanted to ask you a couple of things about, or just kind of highlight a couple of things. And I love the phrase, because I felt it too. Jason, maybe you felt this at some point, Melissa, but that phrase that the Holy Spirit would just not let me go. Mm-hmm. I'm so grateful for that very fact that when I shifted from being a religious kid who knew I shouldn't be doing what I was doing, but had no real life or power within me to resist it, when I finally came into genuine faith, and then later through a series of disappointments and anger toward God, wound up back in that world for a period of time, there was a war that went on in me that was not there the first time around, because I didn't have the Holy Spirit living inside of me. I wasn't a new creation in Christ. That was now living as my old self. So that battle was miserable and painful, but it was so necessary to draw me back, I think, into into a place of repentance and surrender. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit more, Teresa, as far as that phrase, like the Holy Spirit would not leave me alone?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it felt like this war going on inside of me. Like, it just felt like this darkness and this heaviness was there that I feel like had been lifted when I came to know the Lord back when I was 15, and just, I didn't have peace, like just the peace and the joy that I knew previously in my life with the Lord. I just always felt like just this yearning inside for the closeness with Him that I just couldn't seem to find.
Yep. Yep. Well, and I remember too, just distinctly feeling like that there was a point though where the Holy Spirit had been wooing and drawing and pulling and making me uncomfortable in what I was doing. But I felt like toward the end of kind of coming into genuine repentance, I felt like there was this sense of, I'm getting so close to my conscience being seared. Like I had this real sense, and I feel like the Lord was just saying, Garry, you must make up your mind. This is not going to go on forever this way. And I began to really have this sense of urgency about, I've got to make a decision, and the only sane decision is Jesus, is choosing Him and turning my back completely on my flesh, basically. So there was also that sense that, that thing that Paul was talking about our conscience being seared as with a hot iron, I felt like I was really flirting and getting very close to that happening. And it would have ultimately, I think the battle would have eased or gone away entirely, but I would have also have been lost in that mess. So Jason, Melissa, do either of you have like an experience where you felt the Lord really battled?
Well, I had been a religious kid as well, but no one had ever talked to me about a personal relationship with Jesus. Nobody had really told me what was right and what was wrong in terms of sexuality, and not just what was right and what was wrong, but what was healthy. And being exposed to pornography and some other things really burned those boundaries down. So I didn't feel a lot of conviction about my sexual relationships with men. But when I got involved with this woman, that's when I began to feel guilt and shame. And I had a distinct sensation that every time I was choosing her, I was putting Jesus in a corner. So the way I describe it is, I had a cross that I used to wear all the time, and I couldn't wear it when I was with her. Like, it's just, I could not have those two together. And so, I feel like the Holy Spirit was drawing me, even though I wasn't a believer yet.
Yeah.
And so when she dumped me, I remember crying out to God, like, God, you've got to help me. Like, I feel like my heart's been ripped out of my chest. And then I don't know what I was expecting. The next day I woke up still thinking, this is who I am. And but it was about a month later that I came to faith in Christ. So I'm so grateful for his pursuit of me, that he never let me lie down at peace with my idols, is how Andrew Comiskey talks about it.
Yeah, he kind of cuts to the chase. Jason,
Yeah,
how
Gary,
about you?
I really resonate with what you said about getting seared by the hot iron, not being able to find your way back. And I had that sense that if I went down that path of being intimate with a man, that I would be drawn somewhere that I really wouldn't be able to navigate my way back from. And that kept me from being physical and having a relationship with a man. So that's not part of my story, but who I idolized was myself. My sense that I had to control kind of everything in my life to make it go smoothly. And I really didn't believe that God was greater than my experiences, my challenges. And I didn't occur to me most days to even look up to him to assist me or carry me or walk uh, alongside me. I had the Bible verse that he lights our steps in our path, but I don't know, I just felt like the light was turned off and I had to be the one to get my flashlight out and do it all myself. And like I shared last time, I ended up in the emergency room a couple times just because life didn't work anymore. That control and trying to make it happen didn't work. So it was a real physical wake up call that I got flattened by, that forced me to say, if I'm going to be able to put one day at a time, one foot in front of the other, it's got to be something greater than me. I didn't have the luxury of thinking I could do life on my own. A lot of people, they come from a background where, I had a good upbringing, or, my thoughts aren't so dark. I don't have these big traumas and temptations, and they're kind of able to go through life. I mean, everybody, of course, has challenges, but for me, life just didn't work. And, I had nothing but to turn to Christ to move forward.
Yep. Well, and there's a couple of other thoughts, and I definitely want to make sure that we kind of leave an open-ended moment toward the end of our time together for each of us to share something that we may not have brought up yet, but that we feel is important to add to this podcast. So, I mean, obviously, one of the things we want to talk about is marriage. I think that I'm the only one, knowing your stories a little bit, and obviously knowing Melissa, I think I'm the only one who actually has been divorced, right? Teresa, you weren't divorced, were you?
No.
No, right. And Jason, you weren't. So just to say something about leading in with this question, I am often asked, and probably you guys are too at different times, when did you know that you were ready for marriage? Or even when did you know you were ready to begin dating? I'm not a big fan of the whole like dating scene kind of thing, but just to even begin kind of exploring the possibility that maybe God is opening a door for me to date and to spend time with and to move beyond friendship with Melissa, for example. But and I think it's a great question, and I think it's important that we wrestle with that, think through that. That those that are listening or watching this need to know that there's a lot of healing, and this has already been mentioned a little bit, but there's a lot of healing that we needed to go through before we are even in a place to really be ready for marriage. And again, being ready for marriage doesn't mean it's going to be perfect by a long shot, but that you become whole enough. Marriage is already hard enough without dragging all your baggage in, without having worked on it much before marriage. So in my case, I got married pretty quickly after coming out of the LGBT world. And with maybe a year and a half later, my ex-wife and I were married. And that only lasted for several years because there was a lot of brokenness in our relationship, no sexual impropriety on either one of our parts, but there was a lot of unhealed junk, that just what I'm speaking to, that neither of us even understood or knew anything about. And of course, I carried the bigger load than out of the two of us. But she just decided that she was done kind of working on our marriage and was unhappy, not in love anymore, and decided that she was going to pursue a divorce. And that crushed me. I went back into the LGBT world maybe a year and a half after our divorce, and it took a year for our divorce to go through because I didn't want that. I wanted reconciliation. But my point in saying all of that is I know that I wasn't actually ready for marriage. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody couldn't be ready for marriage and then that somebody, one of them still decides I'm done, or both of them. But my point is with Melissa, and coming out of that last marriage, and there were probably 15 years. I'm trying to think of the time frame. Yeah, probably 15 years between when my divorce happened and I met Melissa. So there's a lot of period of time in there, both in terms of rebellion and anger toward God and just living in a lot of that brokenness, but then coming out and finding a church and really beginning to a church that was kind of a teaching hospital model church and that walked alongside of me and was pouring in and bringing a lot of healing. That's when I got connected with Living Waters. It's where I met Melissa for the very first time at a Living Waters training in 2004. But it was, and Teresa, you mentioned this too, and I love the phrase, you mentioned it several times, that idea that God was offering you more. And I love how Andrew Comiskey talks about in the Living Waters material and other writings that he does about simply the phrase "the more." And that phrase just so resonated with me. Like I wanted more. I wanted greater healing. I didn't want to just get from. I thought for all of my life, if I could just stop sinning, that would be the pinnacle of the Christian life. If I could just stop doing all this bad stuff, that I would have arrived, And of course, God is kind of giggling about that because no, he had this much, much bigger vision beyond just not sinning, but really pressing into what it means to be a son of God, what it means to be filled with the Spirit. What does it mean to be a man who imperfectly loves his wife, but does it, pretty well and is able to grow into that, what it means to be a father. So I that's one of the things I just wanted to talk about a little bit is so I just shared a little bit for me. I knew that God was opening up a door between me and Melissa because I began to feel this kind of overflow of, there's a plug for your counseling practice on Overflow Christian Counseling, but I began to feel this overflow of this more that God was producing in me, this love and longing and a desire to give something away rather than I think what most even Christians do, which is I'm empty, I'm lonely, I'm hurting. I want someone to fulfill me. I want someone to complete me. And I don't think that's really a biblical way of approaching. Yes, of course, there's benefits to us of marriage and relationship, but I think God was doing something in terms of creating that overflow that was a really good desire to I want to make this deposit into someone else's life. I want to bless, in this case, Melissa, and Melissa's been this profound blessing to me as well. I think some of the flavor of that, some of that sense of that overflow and a longing to give away as opposed to this need based dating relationship or pursuit of marriage. For me, that was part of how I answer that question now, is this overflow is what I think I look back on as being a sign that, hey, I think something's happening where I can step up to the plate and begin to engage romantically and a deeper level of relationship with a woman, obviously in this case, Melissa. Do you have thoughts about, Jason, do you have thoughts about that as well? Like that idea of when do you feel like you were ready to pursue
Absolutely.
Teresa?
And you hit it nail on the head with when you are in a place to give rather than a need to receive. I really feel like that is a good indication that you might be ready. I'll preface that I think if Teresa and I had waited until we were 100% ready, we may not be married. But
yes, that's right.
And Melissa, you said earlier that you had a view of men that they are passive. I'll just have to, raise my hand on that one. That was me. I did. I felt like I needed other people to tell me who I was. There was manhood, strength was outside of me that I had to try and get. And that really put me in a a passive posture. Well, that's not attractive to anybody. If I'm wanting to attract a woman, she needs to see that I'm somebody that is able to be strong for her. And that was very important for Teresa. So going through recovery, taking difficult steps and redemptive risk, that's something that strengthens anybody. And, just choosing to go through that process and do the hard things really showed me that, I'm stronger than I thought I was. And learning that God was a good God who loves and cares and is strong and capable, I was able to borrow that strength and own that myself, to where I felt like, there could be something more for me. This thing that seemed so big, these attractions, this future that I didn't know what it was going to look like. It didn't have to be so big. I shared last time, I believe, that I felt like I was able to forgive my father. I'm doing a little parallel here. Not on my own. It was something I prayed for, but I couldn't generate. And one morning I woke up and the thought came into my head, I wonder how my dad is doing. Well, I was sitting in a conference room at work one day listening to a boring meeting, and this thought popped in my head, I wonder if I could date a girl. I think maybe I want that. And it just kind of came to me. It wasn't something that I forced. It wasn't something I felt a need for that was going to prove that I was a man or anything. I had let go of a need for that. I still had a desire for it. I didn't know how that was going to happen or what it would look like. But I really feel in that moment that God gave me that and kind of opened my eyes to Teresa. I don't know how long from that experience that I had that I saw her walk into Living Hope one evening, and my head turned, towards her. I was talking with a friend of mine who has a similar background, and he had the same experience I did, where all of a sudden, my head turns towards this beautiful woman, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's not happened before. Usually it turns and looks at guys.
Mm-hmm.
It was the coolest experience. I will say I was really blessed that a lot of those feelings that, always kind of wanted to have, like, oh, what's it going to be like to ask a girl out for the first time? I remember knocking on the door of Teresa's house that she was living in with some friends, and I had the butterflies in my stomach, and it was just kind of this excitement, like giddy. I got to feel all of those things. I didn't ask for it, but it was really, really so cool. And Teresa, I don't know how you felt, that first date night when you were sitting there around the couch with your friends, and, I was knocking on the door. I opened the door. I don't know who opened it, but there was quite a few people that were in the living room. I felt like you had a whole crew around you that was trying to protect. And I don't, am I remembering it right that Sean had a gun on the coffee table? Is that correct?
I think he might have, yes.
Teresa had a really good community around her of people that they were so close to, and it was a super special time for her. And I don't know, maybe this is kind of transitioning a little bit into Teresa. I know when we got married, a lot of that closeness that you had with your friends that were everything to you really ended. They were in Fort Worth. We got married. You moved to Dallas, with a bunch of stuck-up people. With me, one of her best friends went to China to be a missionary. Another friend got married and moved away. And I know you really felt like your support system, what you knew, was gone, and all you had was me. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that was like for you after you woke up a couple of months after our wedding and realized that it was me and you in a place that seemed far from home?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a hard one. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is for me, I already shared the word idol. Like God had revealed, that I had made women, and specifically whoever I was with was my idol. And I feel like God just revealed to me during that time, like I had made my community and my friends kind of like an idol out of them. Like they walked through so much with me and helped me through all my healing and were always there for me. But I mean, when everything got stripped from me, I realized that I was putting hope in them when it should have been in Jesus. And so, yeah, being married was wonderful, and I loved it. But that first year was rough. I mean, I feel like I lost my support system, all my friends, everything that I knew. It was just really difficult. So, but Garry, to answer your question, if I could, I loved the way that you just talked about, like, just not looking for something to fulfill you and this need anymore. I had dated men before, and it was always to try to seem normal or try to like shove my feelings and attractions for women away. Or just because I was lonely and wanted to try to see if I could be in a relationship, and they never worked. And so I remember that pop-up feeling I had where the whole world just seemed new and bright and amazing. And this, like my heart, God had just softened my heart. That verse that he talks about in Ezekiel about giving us a heart of flesh. And that's just so real to me, because I feel like I spent my whole life trying to be hard and to show my family that they couldn't hurt me. Nobody would ever hurt me. I was strong enough, just to do this life on my own. I didn't want people to know that they had any power over me. I saw my mom just being controlled and hurt by men. And, so I think I just made this vow, honestly, that no one would hurt me. And, I think what I've learned is that you can't shut your heart off just from pain. When you do that, you miss out on joy and love and all the other emotions as well. And so when I went through this healing process with the Lord, when he just healed me and transformed me and I repented of my sin and really started doing the hard work of healing, I feel like I started feeling these emotions that I had cut off a long time ago when I made that vow. And so all that started coming back, and I just did feel like this overflow, and this love that I felt, but I was also able to receive and give. And so I think it was around that time, honestly, where I noticed Jason, and I started feeling like maybe I did want to start dating or get married, and it scared me. And I remembered wrestling with God over it. Like, is this really something you have for me, or that I could actually do? But I felt excited about it. And that's when I knew I think I was ready to try.
That's great. Thank you. How about you, hon? Was there a moment? Was there clarity around, I think I'm ready to kind of move forward here?
Yeah, so what comes to mind is I had gotten involved in a young adult group at my church, and around the same time as I was going through Living Waters, and then I joined the leadership team of Living Waters and continued to do, my own work and go through different things. And I was considering pursuing a counseling degree. And one day I was in my apartment, and this was 2004, actually before I met you. And I came across a picture of me and a group of friends from, let's say, 1999 or 2000. And looking at that picture, most of them had gotten married by that point, by 2004. And I thought to myself, have I missed the boat, kind of a thing? Like, am I too broken, right? Like, have I missed an opportunity because I've been working on myself? And so I distinctly heard the Lord say that he's like, you've put the work in so that you can be healthy in a relationship. So he was affirming and assuring me that I had done the work, and now that chapter was over. Like, I distinctly sort of felt like he was like, we're going to turn the page, and we're going to start a new chapter. And what that means is you have to kind of put yourself out there. Like, I'm not going to drop a guy on your windowsill, because I was in a basement apartment. And so it's not like my door, but like, it's not like, and so I'm like, oh, okay. And so
You did have a couple guys at your windowsill, but not ones you should be marrying.
Right. Just the one, honey. Thank you for bringing that up. No.
All right. Okay.
Which was, of course, we joke about it, right? That was confirmation that I was getting out of Northern Virginia and coming to New York to be closer to you. So, yeah, so it was around that time. So, like, I started going to, like, a young adults, and I don't even know, it might have been a singles group or ministry or whatever at a church. And that was uncomfortable. I mean, nobody was giving me the time of day, but I was putting myself out there, right? And it was that summer, I think, or excuse me, that fall that we met. And even though it wasn't until the following year that we actually started dating, I really felt like I was open, to a dating relationship, or, something where, there was intention. And I think that was, I always tell anybody who asks, that's what was so attractive. One of the things that was so attractive about you is that you were very clear in your intentions. When you asked me, hey, are you open to pursuing a relationship? If we wind up being friends, that's fine, but that's not my intention. I was like, oh, all right. It also was, the first thing that piqued my interest was, we were called basically to do the same kind of ministry. I was like, oh. So that was quite attractive. So.
Well, and I'm also reminded, I was just at Ridgecrest, which is the retreat center down in outside of Asheville in North Carolina. I was just there for a conference and exhibiting there, and I've been there quite a few times since we've been there with Exodus International back in the day and all that, which is the event that where I kind of popped that question to you about dating, but I was out and right in the same area where we were having that conversation. The same rocking chairs are there, I think, but it just reminded me again, and Jason mentioned this too, so it's one thing to talk about the conversation we had and what I was kind of leading off with, and it was real intentional of me to be direct and take initiative, but I also had all the same butterflies that Jason's talking about, like, what if she rejects me, and I'm going to be walking away from this conference driving whatever it is, 11 or 12 hours back to New York, and feeling all of that. So yeah, I mean, those butterflies are real, and the nerves around it, but it's a good masculine thing a good godly masculine thing to take the initiative and be clear about your intentions and desires. And I think that's one of the things with guys that are not dealing with same-sex attraction at all. You're just talking about young guys in the kind of average in the population who are opposite sex attracted. There's a real challenge and difficulty for them to not only to keep commitments that are being made, and that was true for me too, but to even verbalize or make the commitments in the first place, to have the initiative and to the clarity and the wherewithal to lead the conversation or introduce the conversation in the first place. And I think that's kind of honestly sort of a crisis in masculinity that we're facing today anyway. So anyway, that's a kind of an aside. I oftentimes hear from people the idea, the refrain that, Garry, you're gay, and you're just in denial about who you really are, and Melissa's basically your beard in a sense, with this negative. I say often, I don't often, but I do. But I have been confronted with this very thing. And also that you're in a state of denial, which I always kind of chuckle at that one, because Jesus said something about, if you're going to be my disciple, you need to deny yourself and take up your cross and follow after me. And I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of doing that. But this overall sense that you're just in this bizarre state of denial, you're actually a self-hater of who you really are. And, what are some of the thoughts? I don't know if any of you have experienced whether it's a direct in your face kind of statement like that, or if it's been more of something maybe you saw on social media that was directed to you, or it was said in maybe a somewhat kinder manner. But what are your thoughts about those who would say, oh, your marriage is just really a farce and a front, and if you were really true to yourself and loved to who you really were, you would be with someone of the same sex, and not married to the opposite sex?
Yeah,
Anybody
I
want to
can do
comment on
that.
that?
I get to decide, what it is that I want. And I did feel pressure when I was younger, verbally, that you're gay, Jason. You need to just embrace that and go with it. And I didn't, like I said, take action on that at that time. But I just refuse to say that what I call my arousal template, historically, or my feelings that are one direction. I don't have to let them determine what I really want, which is to be able to own
Yeah.
myself as a man and give to somebody that doesn't have that. If I'm going to give my manhood, manliness, masculinity to a guy, well, they already have that. It's not going to mean as much to them. But to Teresa, that really is something that completes the two of us, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
great. I just love it. My just posture when I was wanting to be with a man was completely different than my posture going, to a woman. It's just like two kind of completely different things. I remember when I was younger thinking, okay, I'm going to be fixed when I am drawn to look at women on porn websites rather than men, but it's like, no, that lust is not something that you experience with somebody you really truly love. That was almost like a fire that's lit by lighter fluid, versus a fire of true intimacy in a lasting relationship as God designed it. That's got coals, that burn, and you have, that's that base of warmth that's always there. Even if the fire dies out, it doesn't take, a whole lot to light it up again. I will say it was interesting that when I was choosing to date Teresa, my dad, who is same-sex attracted, was choosing to go into the gay lifestyle. And I was a bit threatening to him. He said, well, that's great, Jason. That's going to work for you. It's never going to work for me. I'm 100% gay. And I was like, okay, Dad, you do kind of what you want to do. But it was hard for me to hear that he felt like he was 100% gay, whatever that means. Of course, there's research out there that it's something that's fairly fluid. But I guess why it made me sad to hear him say that is because I don't like the idea of being limited by anything. I don't want to be limited. There's a whole world out there that anything is possible. Personality is even changeable, right? We're not fixed or set in stone in so many things. And to see that my dad was, I thought, limiting himself. I'm not saying he needed to, not own that he had those attractions, and he was, of course, welcome to do whatever he wanted to do, and I would love him with it. But he's a black and white guy, and I didn't like that he was making a statement that kind of cornered him into something, is what I believed was happening. So it was kind of awkward. He came to our wedding. I was glad for that, but it was he wasn't very engaged when he was there, and left the reception a bit early. So I was disappointed, and I don't know what all was going on there. That was soon after my parents divorced, and he left, and so that was just a challenge, and he had withdrawn from the family. But I'd wanted him to be at my wedding and celebrate it, and be excited. Man, your son is getting married, and it was a letdown on that front. But
Right.
that happens.
Yeah. Teresa, anything on that idea of people kind of putting on you this sense that, oh, you're in denial, you're a self-hater, this isn't who you really are? Have you maybe, I don't know if you've experienced that much from anyone, but just curious what your thoughts are on that. And then Melissa, you after that.
Yeah, I've experienced it a little bit. Honestly, it's hard. It just makes me so sad because I think we're being bombarded by this thought that you have to be true to yourself and whatever you feel you are, and it just breaks my heart that people are being fed that and believe that when God is able to do anything, He can transform you. And I believe like just being surrendered to Him, and like being filled up and just receiving His love and healing is just, it fills you up more than just being in a relationship with a man or a woman, honestly. And so I feel like that is the number one thing we need to focus on, and not being married. But yeah, I don't know. I'm getting a little lost in my thoughts here, but
No,
I think sadness
great,
is the biggest thing that I feel over that. Because it's just, we get to choose what we do with what our feelings are. And you might be attracted to the same sex, but it doesn't, I don't know.
It doesn't mean you're locked into that. No, that's okay. And I think when you're saying sadness, just to maybe clarify a little bit, I think you did a great job of it. But when you're talking about sadness, it's sadness for the other person who is in such a narrow box and is trying to put you into the same kind of narrow box. It's sadness for the perspective, I think. Is that what you're describing?
Yes. Yeah.
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 Okay. Han, how about you? I don't know if you've encountered much of that or not.
So I think what's interesting is because I historically have been attracted to men, I feel like it wasn't as big of a shift.
Yeah.
In a way, although my same-sex attraction definitely goes up and down, in terms of struggle or whatever. But what came to mind, and I don't know if you remember this story, Gary, but that when I became a Christian and I met my father for dinner, the basic gist of the conversation was he would have rather me be a lesbian than a Christian. I mean, that was the outcome of that conversation. And I think that was twofold. One, he had deep sexual brokenness that he did not want to confront or to have addressed. And he was in complete rebellion from God. And so it was much more comfortable for him to have a lesbian for a daughter than a born-again Christian. And like he was even trying to tell me, oh, I've done a lot of reading on this and this and this. And like by this point, I'm like several years in to my recovery. Living Waters, as you guys both know, is voluminous in terms of the amount of information, right? And so I had been learning a lot. I think by this point, I may have even been in my counseling program or graduated. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. And so I remember praying with someone about that conversation. Because honestly, I was really hurt that, my father basically would rather I be a lesbian than a Christian. And I just remember Jesus showing up in the restaurant where we were, and like him basically saying to my dad, you don't know her and she's mine. Like she's my kid. You know what I mean? And so I just remember Jesus like really putting my dad in his place in a sense and just saying, yeah, she's got my identity. And so that was really, really cool how Jesus redeemed that. But yeah, I mean, that unfortunately kind of epitomizes a lot of my dad's life in terms of just being so prideful and manipulative and resistant. So, and I'm sure over the years we've been doing this, we've heard from other people, who don't like what we're talking about, who would say that we're faking or we're pretending. that we have all of this internalized homophobia that we can't, deal with. And so we're just, all of that. And so I love to talk with those people about, our marriage is not perfect by any stretch of anyone's imagination, but we have a good marriage. And a good sex life, by the way. So for anyone listening who's doubting, so you can't really.
It just happened twice. We have 2 boys.
We have 3 kids.
Right, so yeah. Well, there you go. You see, that's so funny. Yep. Well, it reminds me, this conversation also just very quickly reminds me of a time that I was doing several years ago. I was doing an online training with pastors from different churches, and there weren't many. There may be 6 or 7, and we're having this discussion, and I shared my story and kind of opened things up, and part of this was connected to the direction that I can't remember if it's an association of churches or it was, it almost seems like it was a secular campus ministry that they were connected with as well. And some decisions that they were trying to make about which direction to kind of highlight, whether it's really orthodox biblical understanding about human sexuality, et cetera, or some other progressive version or something. But I got done sharing my story and I opened it up to questions. And one of the young pastors just said, he didn't mean harm or by what he was saying, I don't think at all. But I couldn't believe how clueless he was. In his question back to me is, he said, "Well, Garry, I've heard you share all of this. Thank you so much for sharing your testimony. But for people who are actually gay," and I'm like, wait, did you not hear what I mean? Did you not hear me say exclusively same-sex attracted? And so he was completely discounting my journey and the challenge of coming out of that world to follow Christ, as we've all experienced in this, here together, and so many others have too. He totally discounted the challenge of that because, obviously I wasn't actually gay, and those who remain that way must actually be the ones who are actually. It was just this odd, convoluted kind of thinking, and it so caught me off guard. I mean, I answered his question as best I could, but it was in reflection, after we were done, I thought, I can't even believe that he would have heard this story and then attributed somehow this journey that God brought me on as somehow negating all of my, prior experiences and chosen identity in the LGBT world. But regardless of that, that just came up with this last question. But on the topic of motherhood and fatherhood, I mean, what are your? I want to come back to talk a little bit about marriage, and I know we don't have tons of time left, but I want to come back to talk a little bit about our own relationships in marriage. But what about fatherhood and motherhood? Was that something that, I looked forward to being a father, but was also, it was also pretty frightening in a way. Melissa and I got married when, what was I, 42, hon, I think, or something, and then the boys were, I was 44, my first son was born, and my second son is 46, and I was 46, and I thought, my gosh, we're going to have to stop this, because otherwise, I'll be in the nursing home when they're graduating or what have you. So anyway, we, it was both in a sense a challenge, but it was this challenge that I wanted to really step into and do well, and to have learned from the good things that my dad and my mom did, but also learn from and change the things that they didn't do so well. So I don't know, what are your thoughts, Jason or Teresa, just about the whole perspective on fathering or mothering?
Yeah, I remember I had told Jason when we started dating, I was like, if you want a family, you don't want to date me because I'm not having kids. So I made it very clear when we started dating that I was not going to be a mother. And it was pretty close to our wedding when he was like, Teresa, we can't go through with this wedding unless it's a maybe. Like, you need to hold it open-handedly to God. And so we took a week apart and prayed. And I remember God just saying, trust me, you've trusted me this far. I'm faithful, I'm good. Like, just trust me and just let it be a maybe. So we went on and I said, okay, if God wants me to be a mom, then I'm okay with that. And it was probably maybe a year and a half into our marriage that I felt my heart shifting and getting excited about the possibility of being a mom. And it's a really cool story. It goes to never wanting to be a mom to wanting to be a mom, to doctors telling me that I couldn't without medical intervention or like taking hormones and stuff. And I just I was very convinced that if God wanted me to have kids, that I could not intervene. Like I needed a miracle to happen and for him to make it happen so that I could continue to trust that he would equip me to be the mom that he wanted me to be. And he did. It was, we call Alina our miracle baby because we didn't go on with me taking shots or getting hormones or anything. And we got pregnant naturally. And it was unbelievable. Like God just so
good.
Yeah, he's so good. And so motherhood has been amazing. It's been a really healing thing for me. It's been, I just didn't think that I had the nurturing capability to be a good mom, to love my kids well, to nurture them, to just care for them well. But it's something that God is, as soon as I held Alina, I just felt like God giving me all that love and the ability to nurture and care for her. It's just been amazing.
I fell in love with. I'm sorry. I was going to say I fell in love with Teresa all over again when she became a mom, and I saw that transformation that God did in her heart, and the fact that she's different again from when I first met her. It was the coolest thing. And if you watch her, with her kids now, that's how I would define her as a mom that would give anything for her kids. I love you.
Yeah. That's awesome. So good. Well, so yeah, Jason, what about fatherhood? What about that? Was it challenging kind of coming into that, or were you pretty just generally excited about that? And how has it been in terms, how do you feel like being a father has kind of impacted your masculine soul, or some other way that you might want to describe that?
Thanks, Gary. Well, it definitely makes you step up to the next level in taking responsibility and creating a vision for your family. I was passive as just a habit in life, and the more people you bring into a family, the more that we have to create a vision for what our family is going to look like. And that's something that Teresa was really good at pressing me on, that let's come together, Jason, and say, who are the Mellards going to be? We want to be able to tell our kids, we do this because we're Mellards, and to create that sense of identity on who we are in Christ as a family. And I really loved that process. We're still, working through what that process is as they continue to grow older and change and adapt. I wasn't real scared, to have kids. I was excited about it. I knew, they wouldn't require a ton of work from me as a baby. They did in so many ways with our time and energy, but as far as having to work through brokenness and all of that, and difficult conversations with them, it's more of, okay, how is it going to be when they get a little older? And I want to make sure that I'm not passing on brokenness that I received. I really did take time to think about my parents and what were the good things that they gave to me. One of the things my dad gave is his openness about struggle. Also, desire to learn and continue to think about new ideas is something my mom gave to me, and I wanted to make sure I pass that on. But I want to be very intentional with my kids. Some of the things that I have been intentional about is really listening to them, trying to get down on their level, and taking that time to allow them to fully express whatever is going on in their emotions so that we really connect. I want them to want to hang out with me, not just like, okay, we're going to go do this, but we have dates with our kids individually. That's very impactful. I always try to entertain the things that they're passionate about and encourage those. My youngest daughter, she always presses me on that because she comes up with these really incredible ideas. It wasn't too long ago when she said, okay, Dad, we need to create a robot that will go from our bedroom to the kitchen, get us food, and bring it back. All seriousness. And she's 7 years old. It's not like, she's so young that she wouldn't know that that's impossible for us to try and figure out. And I was like, I don't know. I think maybe we could try. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't have time for this, But she's persistent, and step by step, we created something out of all kinds of different things in the shed. Didn't quite get around to automating it, but I want them to know that you can have an idea and go forward with it. Recently, like I shared, I've been writing and thinking about how a lot of what I've been learning and growing in other areas in my life can overlay with same-sex attraction, and I've been diligent about writing each day and working on a coaching platform. I haven't told them all the details of that, but I've been open, like, hey guys, I've got this idea. I want you to know that I'm doing this, and I want you to see where it goes, so that they know that anything is possible.
That's great. Love it. Hun, how about you? Any thoughts about motherhood? Especially the beginning. Oh, there's a thought there, I think.
No, I mean, it's just, I just was so grateful that the Lord had kind of mothered me. So then just going with the theme of what we've been talking about is that I had something to give out of the overflow, right?
Yes.
Of that sense of being, then I was able to give that to the boys, especially when they were young. And so, yeah, I thoroughly enjoy, being their mom. It was stressful when they were younger. I mean, I'm not going to lie, because we also had Gary's parents with us, and so at one point, and I was also dealing with, after, let's say when Dylan was about 3 and Jaden would have been 5, I was dealing with horrible pain from endometriosis and pelvic floor dysfunction. And so, so in terms of having some problems with anger and my temper and yelling and things like that was a real challenge. And so I feel like that was, honestly, that was the bigger problem than anything related to my sexual brokenness. It was, how do I, get to a point where I'm not, blowing up. And I feel like so many moms struggle with that when their children are young. And not every mom, and the ones that are just like, oh, they're just so peaceful all the time. Like, I just don't. That's like an alien to me. Like, I don't know. I'm not that person. I tend to run hot-blooded and whatever. I mean, that's been historically a struggle, but I think it was kind of the pressure of everything all at once, and the pain definitely did not help. So, but I feel like early on, I was able to give them what they needed. And of course, I think a huge piece of it going forward was really allowing you, Garry, to take your rightful place. Like, it's one thing to be a mom of boys, but from very early on, like, you knew that you wanted to be involved and that that's what they needed. And so it takes a sense of security and trust for moms to step to the side and not be possessive, I think, of their children, and especially sons with their father. So I feel like I've done a really good job at that. And I mean, you didn't give me an option really, which is great, because I knew that that's what they needed. And so even as far down to potty training, like my oldest, he just needed structure, and I'm just not that way. And so I was gone to Living Waters training. And when I came back, he was potty trained, like Garry had potty trained him. It's like, boom. It's like, all right. And then he did the same with our other son. So it's like, yes. So anyway, that's my...
Yep. Well, hey, in the last, our last, thanks, Hun, and our last little bit here, I'm thinking it'd be great for each of us, if something comes to mind, just to share like a real challenge coming into your marriage that was difficult and hard in relationship to the other, or maybe in relationship to yourself even, and how God kind of moved and worked in your life through that. And we keep talking about living waters, obviously, when you've been involved in a program like that, and it has such a deep impact over the course of years of time. And so I remember distinctly, shortly after we got married, we had been doing living waters prior. Melissa was involved in living waters before I even found out about it, and went to my first training in 2004, and we got married in 2007. So around 2008, 2009, something like that, we were both regional coordinators for Desert Stream, and I remember feeling really uncomfortable and about leading along with Melissa, because she's, she's the one that got a 4.0 in her master's degree program. She's the smarty pants of the family. I felt like I grew up in the country, and I felt like kind of well, a redneck kind of guy in a sense, in terms of not being all that sophisticated. And so I always felt this deep sense of shame around what I didn't know, and my lack of education compared to her, and also just her, Melissa's personality, and she's a strong personality, and so I just kind of wanted to sort of crumble underneath of that, or try to somehow hide my shame or my insecurity. And so oftentimes men will hide their shame by putting down the strong women in their lives, and suppressing them. And so, I mean, there was a temptation to do that, or to avoid situations where we were serving together. And it's so funny now, because and I remember having a conversation even with Dean Greer about this years and years ago, and that kind of coming up, and I don't remember, he had some great advice on that, but God has so changed things in our life and relationship when it comes to those kinds of issues, that we delight in being on stage together, and communicating. Like one of our all day summits is on sex and identity, and sometimes we'll go and do weekend ministry events for churches and that kind of thing. I do the majority of that on my own, but when Melissa's able to join me, there's a joy in that. There's a beauty in that, of seeing the true masculine and the true feminine, not perfect, but pretty whole, whole enough in relationship to the other, that there's a huge joy in that. And only God could have really moved me and helped us navigate this thing that felt like this really difficult challenge I didn't even know how to address, or how to begin to work through, to now where it's completely turned on its head, and what was once felt like a liability is absolutely a huge asset, in my life, just emotionally. So but I'd love to hear, again, it's probably something entirely different, obviously, than that. But is there something that God was working out that you became aware of, either coming into marriage or shortly after marriage, that you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience on how he kind of met you in that, and what the outcome has been?
I'll say something Teresa really needed was somebody that could stand strong, that she could push against, that wouldn't move, and she could feel a sense of security in that. Early in our marriage, she did feel alone and isolated, and she wanted to make sure she wasn't going to feel trapped. And I know that she really pressed me, because she wanted to know that I had her back, that I really had her, no matter how she expressed herself. If it was in anger, if it was in sadness, whatever it was, that I could be that guy that is going to be steady. And I was for a while, but then my strength ran out, and I just didn't have a frame for having to be vulnerable, and having to be that strong 24/7. It's one thing when you're dating, and I go and can really be the man that she needs me to be, but then I get to go home and go to bed and wake up the next day. So I had to learn to be thankful when she approached me in that way, because it was a beautiful thing, really. It wasn't something I needed to be threatened by. It was Teresa expressing who she was. And I had to let go of how I thought her expression needed to look like. And I had to let go of taking things personally. I was really bad about that. It's probably one of the biggest changes, transformations in our marriage is when I just decided, forget it. I could think it's about me, but it doesn't even matter, because what I get to do is to look at with love upon her when she expresses herself and she comes and says, Jason, the house is a mess. The kids, aren't listening to me, and you had to work late last night, and I need you, and I need more to say, wow, thank you that Teresa is coming to me with emotion. She's coming to me with vulnerability, and I genuinely feel a love and a gratitude for that. And it's not something I have to generate or fake. And I have experienced God more in that, because I have a belief that he looks down on us when we go to him out of frustration, or we're like, I don't know what you want from me, God. I've been trying all these things and my life doesn't still seem to work. He doesn't get offended by that, and he just looks on us with love. He loves it when we come to him. He loves it when we express ourselves just in brokenness in any kind of way. And I am so grateful for that, and that's something that marriage has allowed me to see as a deeper truth.
That's so good. So good.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that comes to mind for me was early on in marriage. I still had a lot of that hurt that I hadn't worked through with, feeling like my dad left me, and my stepdad didn't really want me. I never had that connection with my mom. I just kind of always had this belief that if someone got to know me well enough, that they would leave. And so I think I had this underlying fear that once Jason knew me well enough, that he would leave too, that I wasn't, I just wasn't worthy of complete unconditional love. And so I think a lot of that caused some struggle in our early marriage, and definitely just had to press into the Lord and really realize that God would never leave me. God loved me. He was faithful. He was with me. He was the one that was going to fulfill me. I needed to look to him in that need instead of Jason, because I was always pushing gets him to see, if you're going to leave, I'm going to be the one that makes you leave. You're not going to make that decision on your own. So that was probably one of the hardest things early on in marriage for me, that and my fear of being controlled by a man, which was something else that I really had to just really lean on the Lord, get counseling and pray through. So.
Well, so something related, I think, to what you shared, Garry, about feeling, I don't know, intimidated isn't the right word, but feeling less than me in terms of education or whatever. I think for both of us, shame was a huge trigger at the beginning, where, so for me, feeling unimportant or overlooked, and especially at the time, early on in our marriage, or I guess it was a few years, the kids were already here, but we went through that terrible transition at the church, and you were working a lot, and it was horrible. And so feeling overlooked or unimportant or not pursued, which was shame. I would respond in anger, which was not helpful. But then also,
and then I would withdraw, and that would I would withdraw when you were angry, and then it was a cycle. Yep.
Right. And we knew going in, our premarital survey had showed that we didn't avoid conflict with anyone else but each other. I mean, it was the craziest thing. It's like anybody else in our life could count on us to, just get to the chase. But with each other, we tended to avoid. And so I would say that's gotten a little better. It's gotten a lot better. But I would say, I could still tend to avoid. But I think related to that, and I think a lot of marriages experience this, regardless of what the background is of the people, is that our love languages are different. And so a big struggle early on in our marriage was physical touch is it's my primary love language. And I tend to be very affectionate. And Garry just was not that way, for a variety of reasons. And so it was really hurtful, at the beginning. And so, one of the things that the Lord really worked with me on, and this was actually in several relationships, not just with Garry, but was, that I can, and this is a Danny Silk book, it's called Keep Your Love On. And, but it's the idea that, I am lovable and I can be loving, and that doesn't depend on anyone else's reaction to me. And so I can't control other people. I can't micromanage how they respond to my love, but I can just keep loving and be myself. And then it's up to the other person how they want to respond. Basically, that's a horrible summary of that, but that was so helpful, in recognizing that if another person doesn't want to receive the love I'm offering, that actually is not a reflection on, am I lovable? And so that was really hugely helpful. And and I would say, Garry, of course, has warmed up quite a bit, and still working on him, so.
Yeah. So I'm just so grateful for all of you, and just appreciate everything that you've shared. It's been, I think, good and rich, and I know we need to bring this to a close. Is there some kind of thing hanging out there that you think maybe the Spirit or whatever is just kind of prompting you to share before we wrap everything up?
Melissa, I loved what you said about that you can be loving and not have to worry about what somebody's response is. Because love, vulnerability, courage, taking risk, those are all good things that are from God. And when I practice those things, I feel a closeness with God, no matter what happens. And when I say, I'm going to reach out to somebody out of vulnerability, I'm going to love when I'm not sure if I'm going to get that back. Just my action and myself doing that, I get to experience more of who God is, because He is love. And I get to experience just the blessing of knowing Him more.
Yes, totally agree.
Yeah. So good. I think it's Peter that writes about this, that it also, I think, opens up that other person who you're creating a space for, an environment for, to step into out of their own hiding or whatever, their own discomfort. That invitation is a beautiful thing. And I think biblically that God is going to be working on that other person to step into that invitation, as opposed to just keep holding back. And it winds up being clearly sin when we when we dig our heels in and we're just not going to come into that open arena that's been really built out of love and out of safety, and to still hold back for whatever reason, I think really becomes, in the case of what Melissa's talking about, on my part, if I won't step into that, that's a sin issue on my part. And so I don't want that either in my relationship with God, but also I don't want that in my relationship with Melissa. So anyway, I think this has been a really great time. I've so enjoyed each one of you. Teresa, it's been great to meet you. Jason, good to see you again. And I think we'll just wrap up here. Friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. And we would just encourage you again, subscribe to our podcast, pass along our podcast, let people know about it being here, give us a thumbs up. And thanks for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you in another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for this Love and Truth Network podcast. To listen to or view future episodes, please check us out at loveandtruthnetwork.com/podcast. You may also subscribe to Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Google Music. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in a future episode.